My God. Howdy, everybody. It is Thursday night, which means it's time for the second episode of Mastering the Game. Thank you, everybody who sent me feedback, who sent me emails, and I kind of expected it to flop. I was telling the Knights after it happened, I was really nervous all the way up to the beginning of the stream. I just kind of figured two people would show up. I'd do one or two, get it out of my system, and then stop. But I guess I'm going to be doing these for a while. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. This week, we're going to be talking about weaknesses. So every single person who is getting ready to start this hobby, and by that I mean GMing, DMing, whatever role-playing system you pick, whatever edition it is, whatever, there's going to be things you're good at, and there's going to be things that you're not so good at. And the things you're not so good at, it might take you years, several sessions. However you go into this, you're going to have to be prepared to not be good at everything. And that's totally fine. I've been doing this for over 8.5 years. There's still stuff that I can hear myself doing in a session, and I'm kicking myself. I'm like, oh, come on, dude, you could do better. You could do better. One of the biggest things for me is description of environments, and I think a lot of that stems from me wanting to get to the next thing. So I'm not trying to shove the party forward, but I am. It's like, yeah, there's some walls and there's some stuff. Let's go. Because I automatically have this thing where I feel like other people are just in my head. They know everything. It's like, yeah, you know what it smells like. They don't. There's no way for them to know because you haven't described it to them. Speaking of weaknesses, first of all, thank you, everybody in the chat. Hi, how are we? What spurred this on this week? And I wanted to tackle this topic eventually, but what spurred this on is I got into a conversation with someone on YouTube by the name of Thanatos, and I'm going to share their thing in just a second. But it was a back and forth conversation, and even though it didn't end as well as I would hoped it to end, it did get me to thinking. So let's jump to that really quickly, and I'll read it to you guys. This comes from Thanatos. It was posted on as a comment on YouTube in last week's episode. I'm about 50 episodes into DNR, and your concept of murder isn't only way off, but it floats. You seem a little fixated on the idea of you murder them when mutual combat doesn't equate to murder. You play with the heads of everybody in the first season, saying murder all the time when it isn't. You have/had a real problem calling every time any player kills anything a murder. No, it isn't, and your sanctimonious snark falls flat. Your giggles saying you murdered them in the preamble to the following episode is pure gaslighting. Resurrection rules don't matter to me, but saying that you can't back out and use the rest of your movement because you thought it was stupid was unfair and ridiculous, because you wanted a frontline zombie fight. Now, this raised a lot of questions for me, mostly because I didn't know what this specific person was talking about, right? I know it was from a long time ago, and I think I asked like 3 or 4 times, like, well, give me an episode. I'll listen to it, and I'll talk about it on the show. If it's something where I feel like I've, really screwed up, or I definitely wouldn't do it the same way, 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, I would definitely cop to it and just say that. So I didn't get a direct answer. It was more about mutual combat rules, and it was more of an equating real life to a fantasy world, which it's a dangerous thing to do because Theria, which is the world we play in, is not Earth. Any D&D setting isn't Earth. And obviously, killing someone in D&D is much less frowned upon, let's say. Um, so I did go back and I listened to a few episodes in that chunk because they described a sequence of events eventually. So I narrowed it down to that, and anybody who listened to the show when it first came out, I played with Group One, and it was the closest I think I've ever played to the whole murder hobo trope. There was definitely some great role playing there, and there was definitely a lot of growth, especially from episode 1 to like 100. Obviously, you start with a bunch of people who were kind of dude broy, a little frat boy, and probably not taking the concept of role play seriously. Hell, my first session I ever DM'd was episode 1. I knew dick all. And by episode, this is like 45 to 50, somewhere in there, I was better, but definitely not as good as I am now. And I would hope that to be true for any hobby, right? I wanted to drive home the fact that killing a person shouldn't be boiled down to stats and numbers, right? It shouldn't just be, oh, that person is worth this much XP. I wanted to make them think about their actions. And one of the ways that I could do that for Group 1 specifically was to point out that, you are killing someone. It's a big deal. You should be thinking about that. You shouldn't just kill them because they're an NPC, or because you want to level up, or because they're in your way, whatever it is. A lot of times in D&D specifically, but lots of RPGs, the term player character is kind of up here. Player characters are kind of held aloft, and NPCs are quest givers. They're lesser. So killing them automatically feels lesser to a player. They're not real characters, quote unquote. They're just NPCs. And I think player 1 felt that way a bit. So I really wanted to drive that home. Now, did I overuse the phrase? Probably, yeah. Without listening to all 50 episodes, I can't tell you. But I'm sure I did. I'm sure I did here and there. But I don't think mutual combat laws really apply. If it's a bandit, a group of bandits attacking the party, that's one thing. It's self-defense, right? Like, I think that's absolutely self-defense. You can argue that. That's fine. If you're attacking someone and they have almost no means of defending themselves, or you're clearly, above them in terms of power, or you have such a leg up that they can't hope to repel you, that's no longer self-defense. That's no longer mutual combat if they didn't agree to it. So, yes, it's a little bit of column A and column B. I'd probably use the term less, but I wanted to get some of the attention. The term murder really does grab the attention of somebody. And I would probably use a different phrase now, here and there, but definitely I wanted to make them slow down, and I feel like that helped a bit. So I don't know if Thanatos is watching. I would love to talk to you about this more. Hell, I'll even offer to talk about this with you live on the air at some point if you wanted to, because I'm not above reproach. I said several times in our conversation that this was 6 or 7 years ago. I don't remember something that happened a month ago, so I need refreshers. I can't tell you what headspace I was in 6 or 7 years ago. It was a completely different world. Bree in the chat, would you say Gwen murdered Gwen? I don't think it was self-defense, so I don't know. And I want your feedback in the chat. Like, what terms do you use in your games? If you're hosting a game, if your party gets into combat and it's a sentient being, something that can something that can think for itself. And, you know, I how would you put it, I guess? Um, Huntsman, so does Jason not acknowledge the chat? I do. I have a lot of screens up, and I'm just trying to make sure everything runs smoothly. Tag me. Make sure to tag me. Yeah. Um, so, with that being said, I asked you guys. I asked you on Twitter. I asked you to email. I asked you in Facebook, and the Knights have been helping to kind of push that. What are you having problems with in your game? What would you say is your biggest weakness? And the cool thing about this hobby is there are thousands of people doing it, and most people, not most, but it feels like most people are putting their campaigns out there to listen to. So while you might have, well, like, let's say myself, I have a hard time slowing myself down enough to describe an area, there are DMs that are fucking masterful at that. Like, really, really good. Like, you can feel the slime on the walls of a dungeon, or smell the musty air in a basement or something. And I mean, I'm in awe of that kind of thing. Whereas they might do something that I feel I have a leg up in, and if we could talk about it, we might be able to, like, kind of trade secrets. So, no, probably not. He has a party member on the stream currently. Hit me up, Huntsman. Tag me. Let me know what you're thinking here, because I'm losing the plot in the chat. So what I did was I gathered a bunch of your thoughts, and I think we can get to like 3 or 4 today, and try to tackle some stuff. And I guess we're going to be doing this a little more because I'm not going to get to everybody who hit me up. I will say that you can send me emails at any time at masteringthegame, DANDR at gmail.com. That's masteringthegame, DANDR at gmail.com. And I will try to either get back to you in email or answer it on the show. Maybe I'll just have an email section. But I think we could tackle 3 or 4 of these today. Huntsman in the chat. Sorry, we're asking if you're going to drop spoilers for the season. I try not to. No, this is kind of a meta show. We're talking about rules. We're talking about how to run a session. If I'm making a reference to something on the show, I'll try to reference something way back. Because, yeah, I think there's no reason to really talk about something happening on our show right this minute, especially if you haven't caught up. So I'll try to keep that out of the show. With that being said, how's about we do a little lightning round? How about we answer just a crap ton of these and see how many we can get through, okay? Okay, so let's start with Sean. Sean says, managing travel times relative to distance. Holy hell. I suck at distances and measurements. The good thing is, we live in an era where you can Google pretty much everything, right? And you can kind of get, the key is to get something relative to you. What do you understand in terms of distance and stuff? Is it a football field? Have you is it one of those things where, oh, I know how, like, in my mind's eye, I can see a football field. So if you say you're 100 yards away, I can see that and measure that out in my head. So if you have, a bow and arrow and you're trying to judge your distance to something else, someone saying, oh, you're 60 feet away, that may not conjure an image to a lot of people. But if you say, if you were to lay down, you're 6 feet tall. So it's like 10 of you. That kind of conjures a little bit more of an image, and it's helpful to other people to kind of approach this differently each time. Give the measurement, absolutely. But if someone's having a hard time imagining that, then try to give some kind of real life equatable distance. if you're judging how far a town is away. Really, what you're talking about is how long is it going to take you to get there? Because you can throw out miles, and that really doesn't matter to a party. Because if I tell you something is 10 miles away, that's not that far. We have cars, we have bikes, we have buses, all that stuff. But if you have to walk everywhere, or maybe if you're well equipped enough, you have a horse. 10 miles is a completely different measurement. So what you're probably going to tell people is, with breaks, it's probably going to take you, most of the day. You got heavy packs on your backs. You're going to have to stop every couple of hours to get a drink, probably take lunch, a nice hour-long rest, then you're back on it. That's more of a distance measurement at that point. You can kind of tell people that, and most people are going to go, okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. In the book, we have maps for most of the larger towns and cities, but we also have a continent map for Alara. And we had to work with the cartographer and get an accurate gauge of miles and then break that down. So I sat with Steve, Steve the Wiki guy, who has, good God, he's been with the show now for a long time, our official archiver and all that good stuff. But I sat down with him to try and work out how big the continent is in total, because I'm no good at measurements to begin with, and it's like, well, how many square miles is it and all that. So we worked that out, and then we worked with a cartographer to put a scale on the map so you can kind of see where things are. But even then, I have people hitting me up and just asking me, it's like, could you just put up measurements for how long it takes? And we might be doing that on the website at some point, because I think that'd be super helpful. Spiderhawk in the chat. Just started as a DM in D&D recently, halfway through my first campaign. I think my biggest issue is gauging how much is too little or too much to throw at players. If I have things scaled as told to me in the modules I've used, it seems too easy. But if conversely, the couple of things I have come up with think is a bit too grindy or a bit too combat heavy. So if we're talking about D&D 5e, one of the cool things about D&D 5e is they scaled way back on how often they're guessing a party is going to get into a fight during the day. In 4e, I believe it was like 6 to 8 times a day they're guessing you're going to fight. Which, I guess if you're going through, a trap-laden dungeon and there's 2 or 3 people around every corner, yeah, I mean, sure. In D&D 5e, they're guessing somewhere between 3 and 6 fights a day. So when you're in a module like that, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll throw a lot of kind of easy fights, right? These are wars of attrition. It's not meant to threaten a party. At no point while fighting 3 bandits is your 5 or 6 person party supposed to go, oh no. What it's supposed to do is eat up resources. It's supposed to wound them enough that they either have to use potions or spell slots, getting themselves back up to 100% before they get to the next section. So by the time they get to the big bad, they don't have everything at their disposal. They're not fresh as a daisy. They don't have max spell slots. They don't have all their potions. They don't have, a couple of rituals that can only use for a day. Maybe they don't have their lay on hands anymore. So it's kind of meant to grind them down a little bit. I don't particularly enjoy that style. I like it when fights have some meaning, right? I like it when there's kind of a sense of danger. Every fight can't have that, because to get that, you have to walk the razor's edge of having the party believe, oh no, we could lose this fight. Losing either means you all get knocked out and captured, or you die. To get that, There has to be a genuine threat that the party can overcome. And then you throw in random dice rolls. So if you try to balance every fight like that, you're probably just going to end up killing your party. And if that makes sense for the area of the world they're in, that everything is that dangerous or, you know, potentially deadly, that's your world. That's up to you. But if you're just trying to give them a little something to do on the way to the next thing, play it safe and pull it back, especially in the first 5 levels. The first 5 levels, most players aren't going to have too many tools at their disposal. Right around level 5 on, you're definitely going to see them pull out some trump cards. That phrase is ruined forever. They're going to pull out something that either you didn't know they had or they just barely remember they had, because they're going to have more abilities at their disposal. They're going to have more spell slots. They're going to have rituals. They're going to have clerics are going to have more channel divinities, all that stuff. And it's going to be more circumstantial. It's going to be more, oh, if I roll a charisma saving throw, then this happens. But it's going to come up. And that's when you're going to want to ratchet things up a little bit. If you're using, let's say, a combat calculator, and a fight is telling you, oh, this is, let's say, hard or deadly. But you have PCs in the mix that are level 10, 12, something like that. It's better to err a little bit on the side of challenging, because challenge rating can't take into account all of the tools at their disposal, or what classes they have in their party, or what abilities the monsters have that you're throwing at them. There's too many variables. So all it's doing is gauging how a 4-player party would fare against the things you're throwing at them. So you can kind of edge it up a little bit as time goes on. I rambled a lot there. Let's do another one. Let's do Mitchell. Mitchell. Okay. Differentiating NPCs if you suck at voices. I feel like there was a time. Well, I know there was a time, but I feel like there was a time when I was just terrified to do any voices, especially in front of the group that we had at the time. And it gets really boring to kind of just use the same voice, your speaking voice, for every NPC. But it doesn't have to be. If you absolutely cannot do voices, which is a lie, everyone can do some kind of voice. But let's say you just are, hands down, you can't do it. You're too embarrassed. You can start kind of easing your way into that by doing a bunch of different things for NPCs. The way someone speaks, their speech patterns, the words they use, the tempo, how fast or slow they talk, how high or low their voice is. You can do tons of stuff with voices without ever actually putting on like a special voice. If you're approaching an NPC and they kind of have a slow way of speaking, they think in between each thing they're going to say, that's very it's very thoughtful, every word that comes out of their mouth. That's going to be different. Even if it's the same voice you're using, that's going to be different from the hyperactive child NPC that they're going to meet in a town at some point, and they're really excited about everything and they want to show you stuff and let's go. You can do the same voice and just find different ways of speaking. You know, personality means a lot when you're talking about an NPC. You can be able to do 50 voices, and it doesn't matter if all your NPCs act, carry themselves and speak the same. None of that matters. So first, focus on the personality of your NPCs. What makes this NPC stand out? What is, if you had to look at one of your friends and in just a few words, sum up their personality, like the first thing that hits you in the face, it's like, okay, are they a loud speaker? Do they speak too quietly? Do they speak very fast? Do they think before they speak, or do they just spit things out and maybe hurt someone's feelings? All of those things are things that you would know about that person within an instant of meeting them. Your first conversation with them, you're going to start picking up things. Think about people you've met at school, at a party, at a work function, whatever. Like, everybody has a couple of things that stand out where you know who's speaking, even if you can't quite make out what they're saying, you know. Let's do Jan. And then I'm going to take some questions from the chat. John, planning what the players will do before realizing that I have to abandon my grand schemes and improving. I think half of your session should be spent on, let's say it's your first session. This is session number 1. Half your session prep should be spent working on what you perceive to be the plot. What do you think is the big driving force? Whether it be, a specific NPC who's pushing things forward, a political party, grasping for power, a mad king, a dragon, whatever it is. What do you think is the big thing that everyone's going to be talking about? Then you should spend the second half of your prep time thinking about your players. Absolutely 100% thinking about your players. What do you know about them? What do you know about their personalities? And what do you think they're going to gravitate to? Because that's what it all comes down to. You're telling a story for them, not you. This isn't about you. Now, you can put together a story that you're passionate about and you think your players are going to jump on it. But you can't dictate that. Even if it's something your players might normally be into, they may have just seen a movie and they may have just seen Dread and they're really into the idea of clearing out a building, the raid style. And, there's a bunch of goons that may be their big thing. And then maybe they'll get back to your thing another time. But be ready to drop what you've been working on at a moment's notice. That doesn't mean that the big bad or dragon or political party isn't still in your world doing stuff. It just means that maybe that's another person's problem, or maybe it's for the players later on. Maybe by not paying attention to that, things gradually spin out of control, or maybe solve themselves. It makes your world feel more real and more lived in, that things happen when the PCs aren't around. That things continue moving whether or not they choose to get involved. Here's a question. How do you, as a DM, help your players reach their individual goal without sacrificing the integrity of your main plot thread? Well, what I perceive to be the main plot thread is whatever the party really wants to get in on. So, a lot of personal motivations can come up on the way to something else, right? And you don't really get to decide when that happens. Sometimes it happens in the 6th session. Sometimes it happens 30 sessions in, and there's no way of really, beyond scripting it, telling a player when it's time to pull that trigger. I've always said that if you're playing an NPC with some deep, dark past, there's a certain amount of time you have before everyone gets bored and stops asking you. If they notice, hey man, you seem to be going through something, what's wrong? We're having a big campfire scene. How you, why are you so depressed all the time? What's wrong? What happened? Oh, don't ask me. I don't want to talk about it. You get a couple of those. You get a couple of times before you get the diminishing returns, that law of diminishing returns, where they just go, all right, I don't give a fuck anymore. I don't care. I'm going to go over here because this NPC is more fun, or this player character actually talks with me and gives me something to work with. Improv, and that's what a session is. It's improv. The dice are constantly improving, you should be improving, and everything that happens as a result of you touching something there's almost a tiny bit of randomness in everything. So, in improv, it's very important to give the person who's interacting with you something to say back, something to leap off of, something to, give them some meat, right? If you bust out a soliloquy and there's no opportunity for them to go, oh man, I know what you mean. Oh, I had a thing with my parents too. Then you're just talking at somebody and you're not helping a session. So let's say you have a player character, right? Let's say they had a really bad run-in with orcs at some point. You know, orcs murdered their family and all that. Now, above Overdale and below Winterhaven right now, right on the edge of the Evergreen Forest, there's a tribe of orcs that are kind of living amongst people who aren't orcs for the first time. They're trying to learn languages. They're trying to curb some of their more aggressive bits of nature, which is fantastic. But to that player character who may be some envoy, let's say they're sent to deliver a message, they may be going through a bunch of stuff. Maybe that manifests in a bunch of different ways. Maybe they have a panic attack getting near this tribe of orcs, this clan. Maybe one of them looks like one that killed their dad and they just want to shoot it. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. And you may not have been planning for that in, let's say, session 3, but that doesn't mean that you get one opportunity to pull the trigger on your backstory. Your backstory should inform who you are. Yes, you should grow, but it's not necessarily something your character is going to get over and put a button on in that third session. So let's say they take a shot at one of the orcs and there's this big misunderstanding, and now maybe those orcs want to put you to death and there's a trial, or someone vouches for you or something. There's a bunch of stuff you could do with that outcome. Let's say they have a panic attack and maybe some of the orcs think your character's weak and they don't want you near the clan or something like that. You could do a bunch of different stuff, and your character has gotten some of their backstory out, but it's not over, obviously. There's still a ton to do. Maybe they make friends with an orc down the way, or maybe they see that orcs have a culture all their own, and they're not just murder-happy psychos as painted by a lot of the other civilizations. So there's a ton of things you could do with that, and I genuinely think a backstory should be something that you sprinkle in throughout a campaign. It's not, oh, I'm sitting down, I'm going to prep Susan's backstory today. Boom, we're pulling the trigger on that. It just so happens in this arc, Susan's character's backstory comes up very quickly because we're going to their home. We did the same thing with Tatiana in Arc 2, and sometimes you never see someone's family, and we have to get that out there somewhere down the line. But be ready to pull the trigger on something like that if it comes up organically, but be patient enough to hold back until it comes up organically. You don't want to be the person who's shoving a square peg into a round hole. My God, there are a bunch of people. Thank you so much for talking in the stream. By the way, what do you think we should, what do you think we should be tackling next week? I got a poll up right over there. You can vote in the chat, and I guess by the time we're done this little episode, we'll know what we're going to be talking about next week. And you can send your emails to me, and I'll answer them in the next episode. So, last one of these for the lightning round. And this one is an email. This one's from Chris. Chris, yes. Is it okay to refer to D&D books and references to help grow my campaign? I've used some things in the past, but one of my players said I should be good enough to make everything up from scratch. I work 50 hours a week and just don't have that kind of time. Chris. Wow. Yeah, it's absolutely okay to use resources, especially if you work. So that is something I struggled with for a while. There was this, should I or should I not? When I first got into, can I read the topics out loud for folks? Oh, wow. Yeah, I guess that is a little small. So, the red option is voices. I could be talking about voices next week, planning a session in less than an hour, negative feedback, or starting a podcast. Here, I'll even make that a little bigger just so you can see it. And boop, there. That should be a little bigger for everybody, and I'll just shrink that down in a minute. So, I'll move over here. First of all, Chris, use whatever. Use whatever you want. You're the one planning a session. I'm guessing this player isn't the DM at any point. And if if they're saying, "Oh, you should be able to make everything up," that's a little selfish, especially if you work 50 hours a week. Now, when I was working a regular job, I used a lot of that time because I was bored. I used a lot of that time to, think about what I wanted to do with a campaign or a character or whatever it is. And I had the luxury of being bored at work sometimes, doing a 12 or 14-hour shift overnight and being able to think about that. Some people don't have that kind of luxury. They work in construction. Maybe they work in a hospital. They don't have a lot of me time where they can think about this kind of stuff. Let me shrink that back down just a little bit so that I'll make it a little bigger for you guys so you can see it. There we go. Perfect. So I have purchased thousands of dollars in resource books, in cards, in modules, and stories, and all that stuff. And I'll be honest with you, 80% of it I've never looked at. I haven't. But that doesn't mean that I won't one day. I don't think I've ever taken something from a book and just used it one-to-one, but it is a fantastic way to get an idea for something. It's the same as watching a movie. It's the same as playing a video game and listening to a song and just getting an idea in your head. You could look at a monster and it'll remind you of something from your childhood, maybe something you were afraid of in the dark, and you want to make your players afraid of that thing that you were afraid of in the dark. How do you do that? Well, remember that feeling that a shadow moving across the room gave you, or being terrified of something under the bed. Remember that feeling. Start jotting those feelings down. Create like a little vision board, like a mood board. And you can start making something wholly unique to you by looking at something in a book. Maybe it was a kind of Cthulhu-inspired thing, and it just inspired you to do that. I can give you... okay. You know what? I've assembled just a few things here. This one is just a bunch of monsters for your 5e campaign. That's from Colwood Publishing. If you remember... let's see. We talked to How to Be a Great GM, their Nautical Campaigns book. That was fantastic. That was a very specialized thing. And while I'm not using a bunch of the sub-races and stuff, I love the ship combat rules. I love all that stuff. Limitless Adventures is a fantastic company that puts out just tons of different encounter books, monsters, that type of thing. They have a Kickstarter going on right now for their 3rd volume. This is my old volume number 1. I just got this in the mail today, which is the Loresmith's Remarkable Shops, Remarkable Inns. And it's just ideas for describing inns or drinks or how things taste, feel, smell, names. If you suck at names, do not be afraid to use a random name generator or something. Who cares? You're planning it out. 98% of you out there are just playing games for fun. Why should you care if you're pulling something from a book? You've been working 50 hours a week and you have an hour to put something together. Grab whatever. Who cares? As long as the players are having fun. Not only is that a smart way to plan a session if you don't have a lot of time, but you're supporting small businesses or wizards that are putting these books out and they need to make a living, right? And I'm not just saying that because we put out a book. I'm saying that because I like the feeling of buying a $10 book from somebody or supporting a Kickstarter and then getting that in the mail sometime later, like a present I got myself. I love doing that. And even if I'm just thumbing through the pages and looking through the art, even if it's something that I probably won't use anytime soon, I love getting inspired by that stuff. So, buy our book is what I'm saying. Question in the chat. Survivor Lad. Hi, Jason. First time joining the stream. Really excited to be here. Question. I'm about to start my DMing campaign. My DMing a game, and in this game I want to give my characters the opportunity to use firearms, mainly the Renaissance era weapons in the DMG and the fighter subclass. What advice or tips can you give about having firearms in a D&D game? Okay. One thing I want to tell you right off the bat, whatever you're putting in your game, it is important to kind of think about how that impacts other people. Now, one of the big things we just had to do is go over spells in everything. So we go through the player's handbook, the DMG, Xanathar's, Tasha's, everywhere, Ravnica, everything, right? There's a lot of books you could see missing from my bookshelf because they're in another room. And we've been going through all of them, subclasses, everything. And the reason is, let's say there's a spell, and there is in the player's handbook, where a druid can cast this and promote growth. It doubles the growth or quadruples it in a 20-foot radius, let's say. And if they do that every day for a year, it goes up to like 20 miles. If you think about that from an inside the world perspective, there should be no famine. There should be not a farm in the world who doesn't have a druid on payroll who's doing that, right? So it's not just how your players use it. How would other people in the world use that tool? So if you want to put firearms in your game, fantastic. Come up with a set of rules for them, like, it takes a long time to reload them, but they're really powerful when you fire them. Or you fire them, but you don't really have a lot of accuracy when using it, so you want to get real close. It's not like using a bow and arrow. It's more like a scatter gun, something like that. So it's important to think about the world and your players. Yes, your players are going to have access to these guns. NPCs are going to have access to these guns too. If you break into a shop and they have a gun under the counter, do they have one shot before they have to reload and they're screwed? Or is this more like a fucking Uzi that they have under their counter? Think about that kind of thing. And the vice versa works too. If you give an NPC this badass weapon or spell or scroll or piece of armor, and you make them super overpowered, you want to really get over how badass your, level 12 NPC, I'm going to kick your ass bad guy is. That means that the players should have an equal opportunity at getting that badass thing. If it's a gun, if it's a staff, sword, shield, whatever, that should be fair game for players to use as well. Same thing goes with spells. If an archmage can use time stop in a fight, players should be able to use that too. That should not be off the table in your world because fair's fair, basically. And there's a whole thing I could be talking about balancing. If you're going to here's a short answer. If you're going to put firearms in your game, either it's got to be something that's existed for a while and you have the rules for it, ready to go and you know how it's impacted the world, or you're on the cusp of firearms and people are figuring out for the first time. And there aren't really a lot of laws for that kind of thing yet. They have to figure out like, oh, wow, this is going to impact the world. We need to think about this. And wow, man, that might be the player's quest, is to, maybe limit the amount of people who have guns. Maybe it mimics the real life where there needs to be some kind of gun control in your world. I don't want to make it political. I'm just saying there's a bunch of stuff that you could do and have fun with it, and it's a rules thing, but a fun rules thing. Because if you come up with any artifact that does anything, it's basically the same thing you have to do for firearms. This artifact that freezes everything in a 5-mile radius, or summons a dragon, or whatever. It's a tool that could be used for destruction, obviously. But maybe you can refreeze the polar ice caps or something. Like, there's hopefully some conventional use for it that isn't just destructive. Let's see. I am going to have this poll take up the entire screen for just a couple of seconds while you guys get in your votes. Go right ahead. Boom. And in the meantime, I'm going to tell you guys one more time that you can send me an email at masteringthegame@gmail.com. That's masteringthegame@gmail.com. In the coming weeks, I'm going to be putting out some new segments and stuff. One thing I want to do is character and campaign autopsy. Do you have a campaign that just fell apart, or a character that fell flat on its ass? Be it a big bad, your player character, just a random NPC. Send me an email, because I want to talk to you. And I want to dissect everything that led up to that and everything after, and see if we could have saved it in some small way. I would love to do that kind of thing. On top of that, I'm still going to be taking polls and stuff like that on Twitter and Facebook. And you can get to our social media. It should come up. There we are. On Facebook at /Dungeons of Randomness, or you can go to our group page, and Twitter at DANDR Podcast. DANDR Podcast. 2 more seconds for this poll, and we are done. We have a tie right now on planning a session in less than an hour and starting a podcast. So I'm going to count you down. You're going to have 2 minutes. 2 minutes to vote. And then I'm just calling it. I'll flip a coin if I have to. So there's one more thing I'm going to talk to you guys about before we wrap things up tonight, and that is there's a new Kickstarter coming. If you didn't see the announcement for an announcement last night on our Twitter and Facebook, boy, there's a comic book we've been working on called The White Ravens. And what it is it's going to cover the story that happened while Group 1 was away. That whole section where they're just gone, there's the, how did the White Ravens come about? Like, why, how, all that stuff. And that's a comic book we're working on. Honestly, this is being published through Bad Neighbor Comics. That's Jameson's comic company. And it is going to be his Kickstarter. We are assisting with it. We help with the script. We're doing all that, but we're not artists. We don't know how to make a comic at all. Jameson does. So that's going to be starting January 25th. And I really hope you guys back it and check it out. There's a trailer for it coming soon. And there's going to be a big announcement for it and stretch goals and all that good stuff. So that being said, guys, next week, it looks like we're going to be talking about planning a session in under an hour. So I have a fun way to do this. At the top of the stream next week, we're going to set a countdown timer. And in 1 hour, I have to create a session from nothing. Absolutely nothing. We show up, we start, spitballing ideas in the chat, and together we're going to make a session. And we have an hour to do it, and it's got to be fun, or no one's going to show up again, because this is for a new set of players. Let's say a new set of players. You just put up a flyer in the library, or you convinced your family. Oh, that's so much worse. You convinced your family to play D&D for the first time, and this is going to be their first impression of it. So next week, 1 hour, we're all planning a session. Let's see how that works. Thank you all so much. I will see you next Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, for episode 3 of Mastering the Game, where we will plan a whole session together. Don't forget to send us an email at masteringthegame@gmail.com, And holy shit. Thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate it. Bye, everybody.